Well, I think it was an excellent program. I mean, it helps as well that there was a full panel on that program. But I thought it was very, very, very good by all the participants who are clearly very well informed. One of the issues that really concerns us, because I think it is really central to this question, to this debate on fishing generally, is the question of fishing with nets. Because you can't really have a regulatory regime that tries to protect and preserves fishing stocks in British Gibraltar territorial waters unless you deal with the issue of fishing with nets. Because at the end of the day, everybody knows that Spanish fishermen are coming into British Gibraltar territorial waters with impunity, they're laying their nets, and they are causing significant damage to marine wildlife in British Gibraltar territorial waters. And unless that is dealt with by the government, there is going to be a huge gap in the regulatory regime.
Of course, if we leave to one side the question of the regulations and the legislation, the reality on the water is that things are no different now from what they were in the past, including under the GSD administration. The Spanish fishermen used to come into Gibraltar waters to fish then, and they're doing so just the same now.
Well, I accept that it was happening when we were in government. I don't accept that it's the same now as it was then. I actually think that it's worse now than it was then. But look, I also accept as well that what the government has done this time around is a step forward. I mean, I'm somebody who used to enjoy fishing. I don't do it anymore. But as a 13-year-old, I used to wake up every single morning at 5 o'clock during the summer in the morning. I used to go fishing with my brother. And then by 10 a.m., we used to go spear gun fishing. So it's something that is close to my heart. And it is a matter of personal regret that during the 16 years that we were in government, that we did not introduce regulations to deal with this. But that doesn't detract from the fact that if you really want to tackle the preservation of fishing stocks in British Gibraltar territorial waters, you've got to deal with the question of fishing with nets. Now, we know that the government has amended the Nature Protection Act in order to allow for regulations to be introduced to permit regulated fishing with certain types of nets and introduce some kind of licensing system. And we've supported the government in relation to that. Indeed, it's an adoption of our policy, because I've been saying that's precisely what the government should do from about 3 years ago. But then you've got to make sure that the legislation is enforced through either arrests or alternatively confiscation of nets. That's the only way in which to actually deter and to ensure that marine life in our waters is protected, because clearly, although there is a complete ban on nets in British Gibraltar territorial waters at the present moment, it's not respected by the Spanish fishermen.
And what you're suggesting is that the government may be postponing the introduction of these regulations because they might be unpopular in certain quarters in Gibraltar, and they'd rather leave it until after the next election.
Well, I think that has to be on the cards. I mean, the Nature Protection Act was amended a year ago, in fact, it's over a year ago that it was amended in order to permit regulations for regulated fishing with nets. A year later, nothing's happened. Now, you've asked the Chief Minister about this in an interview on the 12th of May of this year. And he said, well, first of all, we're going to be dealing with certain aspects of fishing, which they've done. And shortly afterwards, we're going to be dealing with the question of fishing with nets. Well, I hope that is what he does. And I hope that the government is not going to deal with this after the next general election, because they don't want to take an unpopular decision. Politics is about taking and defending decisions. We have quite clearly said 3 years ago that we would introduce legislation in order to allow for regulated fishing with nets. The government has adopted our policy. Now they should have the courage of their convictions to see it through and not just simply wait until after the next general election.
Well, I suppose the reason that you hope that Mr. Picardo doesn't introduce these regulations after the next election is because you'd like to be Chief Minister by then, and it'll be you that either does or doesn't introduce them.
Well, I can tell you that if I were Chief Minister after the next general election, that I would introduce regulations in order to allow for certain fishing with certain kinds of nets, and fishing at certain periods of time in the year, so that it allows fishing stocks to recover. But if somebody breaks the law in British Gibraltar territorial waters, I would expect the law to be enforced, and I would expect that Spanish fishermen that come into our waters that do not respect our law are treated in exactly the same way as any other citizen in any other part of Gibraltar that breaks Gibraltarian law.